testimony slash journey from a young lad to now. And so that's where we're going to start. Yeah, old man. Obedience was basically to be obedient. That was the definition. That was very exciting and fun. It comes from hapakauo, whatever, to hearken, to listen attentively is the root word of it. A lot of I feel is God actually like working through me with that, with obedience, listening to Him over the years. I've really grown in that, and I think that's one of the things that I really want to emphasize is you don't just arrive in any of those things that Christ wants you to do, being obedient to Him. It's a process, and that's part of the reason why He sent His Son. We'll start out with little me. So this is little me and my little brother James. If those of you who know James, that's James on the right.
You're like throwing James under the bus.
Yeah, James. I throw the whole family under the bus in this, so it does. Yeah.
It looks like it.
At a young age, let's see, I think I was 4. It's my youngest child memory. My sister had passed away, and she died as a little baby, and it was something that was really hard for me. It's that night I remember just waking up, going out, and like seeing a bunch of firefighters and stuff there. My mom holding a bundle, crying, and I kind of, I guess, knew what was going on. And so I went into my room and I hid underneath my desk. I told the story before, but and I stayed under there for a good long while, to the point where my parents were actually like searching for me. They couldn't find me. While I was under there, though, Jesus came to me personally and talked with me, just comforted me. I don't really remember all the stuff he said and all that, but I just felt a peace. From Patty's sermon last week, where she was talking about peace and just how God brings peace to you. And at that moment is really like one of the fundamental points, foundational blocks in my salvation and my faith in Christ is I was lucky enough to have an actual encounter with Him, and it just was something that was really powerful in making me who I am. These days. So this is a little bit later in our lives. That's me on the left with the amazing glasses, and then James on the right, and my sister in the middle, who looks quite a bit like Lorna. But I was lucky to grow up in a Christian home where my parents were saved, my grandparents were saved. So Christ has always been part of growing up, part of my life. And about this time in my life, I really started diving into scriptures. I started studying lots of Ezekiel was a book that I really, really enjoyed at the time. And God started kind of showing me, I started kind of forming where I wanted to go in life, who I wanted to be, who's God want me to be. So I prayed a lot into that. He gave me some guidance, here and there, little things. Started, getting lots of words for people, scriptures. I was really getting into I feel the spiritual and just the spiritual connection with Christ, that level and it was, looking back, it was a really good time for me. It's like I said, a nice protective environment where my parents nourished that. They encouraged me in it. It was really good. And then, I don't remember what this was, but it was a bad, terrible photo. But, thanks. About this time in my life, I had event which in some ways scared me. I had said I was definitely a lot more in tune with the spiritual realm, I felt at that time, and I had an incident that happened where saw this. I was at another church. I came out of the bathroom and I saw this like bundle on the ground. I just felt this like weight, this fear, this terror kind of in my heart. And I just kind of knew like it was my sister that had died. And for me, that really scared me. And I talked to my parents about it. I think they didn't really necessarily know what to do with it either. So I was like, and in that regard, it kind of really shut me down spiritually in many ways. I definitely didn't reach the level. I reverted a lot in that. Wasn't as in tune with spiritualness and as much of the spiritual realm, and it just kind of really made me say trigger shy, I guess, about it. So yeah, much more cautious, and even though I say it's a point of inability in some ways to be spiritual, I say I still was reading the scriptures and all that stuff, but the spiritual part of it had definitely taken a little bit of a toll from that. Yeah, so there's that one. And then 8th grade graduation. Nice bowl haircut. My baggy pants was a thing. And my mom always insisted I needed bigger clothes than I actually wore. But so, 8th grade was cool. It's like, you go into high school, start, seeing where you're going in life, what you're doing. At this time, I got a few words. I started really feeling kind of God calling me in a certain directions towards certain things. I was like, I know I want to be married. I know I want to have kids. At that time, I wanted to have like 12 kids, because a lot of our friends and family all had 12 plus kids. And a few other like little words, like I said, or one, I was starting to make goals like how am I going to get, because I really felt I wanted to be financially stable. I wanted to have a house. I wanted to have all the dreams. Those are my dreams. And then I had this other word about, I felt really called to one day become president. And so that was something I kind of aspired to at the point I was like trying to start planning out my life to, in a way, what would make me, more help me achieve that dream in some ways. And my family's always been, we'll skip ahead. So there's high school graduation. Cheese. My big bling high school ring. And yeah. So, yeah, shortly after that is where we met. So, yeah, I'm throwing everybody under the bus today. Yeah, this is up in Paradise, is the Jack in the Box, which I don't believe is there anymore. Or they? Yeah. Yeah, back at the same time I graduated, I was living with my aunt. She was having, one of my nephews was on the way, and she was having, she had to be bedridden, so I was up there helping them with that. A couple of months before graduation, I was homeschooled, so it gave me a lot of flexibility, which is nice. Woo woo, homeschoolers. Nerds. Yeah, nerds. So, I was like, I still wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do. I was kind of like, well, Jack in the Box, it was my first job, official job. I threw myself kind of into that. I worked 3 to close. I go to sleep, wake up, work 3 to close. That was my routine. And I was happy with it. I was like, because, I'm trying to make my money, get my house, get stable for getting married. I had no real intention at that point of meeting anybody. But my lovely wife, whose birthday it is today, she was coming through the drive-thru at Jack in the Box. She ordered some stuff. She got up to the window. She was $1 shy, and and I hooked her up with $1, and she's like, "Hey, here's my number," and then she peeled out and got out of there. But she left me a little note, which I still have to this day, which was I laminated it so it would last. It said, "Call me tomorrow if you want." And and so. Yeah. So I had a long night that night. I got home I was like, well, who's this lady? Just gave me her number, and there was two girls in the car, so I was like, which girl gave me their number? I was like, I don't know. I was like, do I call? Do I not call? I went for a little run, praying, working it out, and I was lucky enough at that time. I was told that this is the woman for you, but now is not the time. Which I obviously did not tell her because I did call her, obviously. And so we went on a date, which I threw her under the bus at that moment too because I didn't inform her. I told her we were going to a baseball game, which we did. With some friends, which being homeschooled, who's your friends in homeschool? Your family. So she got to meet my whole entire immediate family, plus a few other friends who weren't family. They were friends. Hey, and there's a whole stadium full of people watching baseball. So, yeah. So, I figured, if I throw her in the deep end and she can swim, then good to go. Yeah. No, like I said, since I knew that it wasn't the time we weren't getting married immediately, I knew that. So I really wanted to get to know her, because I figured you can fall in love with anybody, or most people. There's always exceptions, but I wanted to be with somebody who I knew that I would also enjoy just hanging out with, who would be a friend. That to me, at that point in my life, was really the most important thing. I wanted to have that friendship solidified, and so I kind of really focused on that. My mistake was I didn't necessarily tell her that. I just went, hey, we're going to this thing. We went on a few other dates, which were very date-like, but we just hung out and watched movies, whatever, which gave her kind of mixed messages. So guys, communicate. Still working on that, but. But again, it's like I knew I shouldn't tell her that, we're gonna get married one day. But so we started that journey of getting to know her, and then I decided I was getting my hair cut in the mall in Chico, sitting there. That's me. That's what I look like back in the day. Yeah, actually working at Jack in the Box, I lost a lot of weight, thinned out, which is kind of surprising, but it's like you're running around all the time. You're on your feet, as I said, and that's all I did was work Jack in the Box, and that's it. But anyways, I was at the mall getting my hair cut, waiting for my brother, James, the goofy-looking guy at the beginning. He was in there to get his hair cut. I had already got mine, so I was out there, so some two recruiters, were walking through, like, hey, what are you doing? I was like, I don't know, just chilling. And they're like, you want to join the Army? I'm like, I always kind of wanted to. And I'm like, hey, that would look good on a presidential resume, like sure. Because at that time I was going through Butte College, I was taking the EMT course, and I just found out, taking the EMT course, that nobody could hire you because of insurance till you're 21, and I was only 18 at the time. So I was like, well, I got 3 years to kill, so, why not join the military? Also, back history a little bit. Two of my uncles were in the military. One of my grandpas was in the military. He retired as a colonel. So it's in the family a little bit. My dad was National Guard. Yeah. I did. I completed my EMT course. I did not get certified. But, so yeah, I got trained. I went through the Butte College training. In the military, no. Because one of the things is I'm colorblind. And so when I went in, they're like, I was originally wanting to do the Air Force, but the Air Force is like, well, you can pump gas. And I'm like, I don't really want to pump gas. And so I was like, no, I'll go see what the Army has to offer. And they're like, hey, we got the coolest job ever. It's like, you can work with radios. And they're like, because it's funny because one of the recruitment techniques for communications is like, hey, in Vietnam, commo guys only lasted 9 seconds. It's like, that was everybody's claim to fame. And because you have this big antenna on your back, and so everybody shoots at you. Yeah, it's like, and so and so you're like, sweet, that sounds awesome. I get to dodge bullets. It works. I mean, I signed up, like, sure, why not? It's better than pumping gas. But yeah, that was a fun time. At that time, when I went off to join the military. Go
ahead.
Let's say, how far do I want to throw you under the bus?
Your sermon.
It's my sermon. So my last day at work at Jack in the Box, I quick. I got my stuff packed up. My dad came pick me up, took me down. I went to say goodbye to my lovely lady who wasn't my girlfriend, but I was friends with, and she was confused and not knowing what was going on in our relationship. I went to her job, and I was like, hey, to say goodbye. I didn't plan it out well. Again, communication wasn't one of my strong suits, and I'm still working on it. So I swung by, because I would always swing by and get cookie dough. That was my in at Papa. She worked at Papa Murphy's, and they have amazing cookie dough. I ate so much of that cookie dough that 4 months that I ate a lot. I didn't end up with any diseases, so that was good. But anyways, I went there to say goodbye to her, and one of the people she was working with, she's like, "Oh, she can't come out. She's stuck in the freezer." And I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm going off to war, but hey, whatever, And it's like,
Okay, disclaimer, I was 18. Okay, that's
and I'm like, all right, well, tell her I'll see you around type thing. And so then I went off. I went.
Were you really stuck in the freezer?
no, it was a total lie. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyways.
That was one from you or
Yeah.
from your employee, a coworker?
Like the coworker saw him coming, and they joked at the time they called him Bill Crosby because he always had those kind of sweaters.
I love sweaters. I love sweaters. I get it from my father.
I was stuck in the freezer because I was so confused. Anyway.
Yes,
that was not very nice.
but anyway, yes, she didn't appreciate my sweaters as much as I did. She has actually made me get rid of all my awesome
Amen.
sweaters.
And
So
hallelujah. Okay.
it was a mutual kind of agreement. Yes. So I went through all my basic training and all that stuff. And so we kind of lost contact at that point because obviously I went off to Georgia. Went through training. Benning. Woot woot. And then went to Fort Gordon for commo training. Then after I came back on leave because I think it was Christmas. It was Christmas break because I went in July. And so by the time Christmas was around, I got right through basic. I went through AIT. And I was scheduled to go to Alaska, but when I was in commo school, they sent some recruiters around like, hey, does anybody want to go to airborne school? And I'm like, you know what? Why not? So I got 3 years to kill, and let's try it out. So I went. I signed up for that. Yeah, conquering my fear heights, which I explained on Sunday or Monday's meeting. I actually wrote a paper for my English class on that, like conquering my fear heights, which I actually might be in the next sermon. But so I kind of that was my philosophy in the military. I was kind of like, hey, they kept offering me these different schools, different things, and I'm like, sure, why not? It's like, if I keep trying out until I fail, or they stop offering me stuff, I'll keep trying. But I went. So I signed up for airborne school. So then I had a couple weeks off in between. So they allowed us to go home for Christmas, and I went home. Nicole had called my house actually a few days prior actually to me coming home, and was like, "Hey, is Nick around?" They're like, "No, but he'll be here in a couple days." And she's like, "Oh, okay, cool." And
The Holy
she's like,
Spirit was convicting me to not be a jerk and to apologize.
4 months later. But it all works out. But no, so it worked out. I came back and they're like, "Oh yeah, Nicole called for you. Give her a call back." So I called her back. And of course, I got her sister on the line, and her sister is like, "Oh, hi." I can't. That was the other thing I didn't say back at the beginning. So she gave me her phone number to call her the original time, and so I call her. I'm a late night person. Her family. At 8 o'clock, everything shuts down. There's no phone calls, there's no nothing. I call at 8:05 or something like that, and that's the first time I hear her sister. Her sister comes off, I was like, "Who's this?" It's like, "It's Nick." Because Nicole gave me her number, and she's like, "Nobody's supposed to call after 8 o'clock." Or whatever. I'm like, "Oh, sorry, she didn't leave that in her little note." But anyway, so I talked to her sister. We'll go back to the future. Yes, you're welcome. And so we met up. I was like, "Hey, what's up?" She started going to college at that time. She was going up to Simpson. We started rekindling that relationship. I was a little clear with my intentions.
It was way more clear the second.
Yeah. So then we entered into a long distance relationship for quite a while. 2 years, a year.
Year
Year and a half. We would write letters. Occasionally, I'd come back every 6 months-ish for 2 weeks. We talked on the phone. Back then, you only had flip phones, if you're lucky. Otherwise, you had to use the other phones. Yeah, it's the beginning of the cell phone era. So no FaceTime, none of that fun stuff. But yeah, so we dated for a while. We had our first Ranger Ball because I went through all the different classes they kept giving me, and they're like, "Hey, you want to do this?" I'm like, "Sure." So I ended up in 2nd Ranger Battalion up at Fort Lewis. They once a year have a Ranger Ball, which was kind of our prom since I was homeschooled and they didn't really have a prom. So, it was and that was us on our first Ranger Ball, young kids back in the day. The year before we got married, we decided. I don't remember if it was at that time to get married. I think it was a couple months later. I proposed. Yeah. And then we got married. Then we had another Ranger Ball. And at that point, I was finishing up my 3-year recruit, my 3 years I'd signed up for. And I was like, well, what am I going to do in life still? Because I still had the dream of being president. I had this stuff God told me. And so I was like, do I want to stay in the military? Do I want to move on? It's like, I had seen a lot in the military. It's hard to keep marriages in the military. It's just a very challenging environment to do that. We've gone quite a bit. And we wanted to start having kids. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to get out. We're going to focus on, our relationship and into the civilian sector. So I went into the civilian sector. At that time, everybody was like, well, because they wouldn't let me, they were like, we don't want you to leave, so they kept trying to convince me to stay. They're like, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, you know what, I'm going to be a pastor. And they're like, oh, all right, we can't argue with that, So I was like, so I threw that out there. It's kind of a word someone, I think my mom had given me a while ago, before that was, you're going to be a pastor. And so I started talking to chaplain, I started talking to other pastors in the area, and pretty much every pastor I talked to was like, if you can do anything else other than be a pastor, do it. And I was like, that's a pretty strong word from multiple people. And so I was like, all right, so I'll try to do something else. So I dug into, whatever first job I could find. I did delivery jobs. A lot of my jobs were kind of delivery jobs after that, which I did fine in those. So I worked as a bus driver up in Seattle. A really good job. We started having kids. This is our house in Tacoma when we had our first son, Blaine. At that time, we had kind of stopped going. We were not going to church at the time. We were kind of figuring out, what we wanted. I'd grown up in the church, so I had some hurts from the church, because churches sometimes cause hurts. I had some figuring out who I was personally, a little bit more so than I was out at my parents' house. We were both in another state from our parents. We were finding out who we were as a couple and, who God wanted us to be. And so a few years there, we weren't actually in church at all. And I think by the time, till the twins, which we had the twins, and then
So cute.
my sister actually found a church on Craigslist, and then we kind of started going to that church. It was kind of interesting. But it ended up being a great church. Because we had tried some other churches. They were a little bit bigger churches, and we just never felt really kind of involved in them. It was hard to connect. But I still always had that kind of that calling I felt to God wanted me to be a pastor and also be the presidente was one of the big things I felt called to be.
And pause. Remember the communication thing? I didn't know that.
I thought I had told her. Apparently, I hadn't dropped that bombshell on her.
The pastor thing or the president?
The pastor
I knew
thing.
the president, and I was like, please, for the love of God, I don't want to be the first lady. But I didn't know about pastor until recent history.
Yeah. We'll get to that. Yes, she doesn't. Nicole does not like the public eye at all. So I said I had this really good job as a bus driver up in Seattle, and we've talked about this before. So we came to this not pivotal point, but we definitely feel a crossroads in our life where it's like we can go this way or we can go that way. And we were praying about it. Nicole, obviously like usual, gets clarification on things a lot quicker tends to than I do. It was a really good job. It was really hard to pass up on. It kind of started our journey of relying on Him. Because we prayed about it, I hemmed and hawed for a while, and then because it was either stay there with this great job or come back here for the kind of the unknown in some ways. We had a place already set up. Nicole's a school teacher, so it wasn't necessarily hard to get a job, but
There was also the fear of like coming back to your parents' house and becoming your.
yeah, because we came back to the same place I grew up, so that so you have all those past memories and stuff, and so that can be discouraging, potentially. You don't want to get stuck in the same loops that your parents have got stuck in. And so we really prayed about it a lot, and we felt God was calling us back here on this journey. And so we were being obedient to that and really leaned into following Him there. And it's really kind of, again, when our relationship with Christ, I feel, really started to build a lot more, was at that moment. We had already been going to church consistently in Tacoma. That church naturally kind of like dissolved actually like a couple months before we left, which was, again, worked out kind of as another sign. Yeah, and so they give us a nice going away party. Got to say goodbye to friends and move down here, make new friends. And then about a year ago, we kind of started on actually becoming certified ministers through the AG. Last Easter was kind of our first real, I feel, event where we were kind of acceptant of that, walking in that path. And in the journey of that path, I discovered that pastors technically are a president. Because you're a 501c3, so therefore you have a board, and the board has a president. And so I felt that was kind of one of God's little jokes to me. And Nicole doesn't have to be in the limelight. But,
What, there's no first lady on the board?
actually, it's funny because some churches do, because one of the churches, because our church was renting the hall from this other church, and they called the pastor and his wife the first lady. His wife was called the first lady. Some churches do that. I was like, oh, okay. So if you want to really get under Nicole's skin, start calling her the first lady. I said I was going to do a lot more scriptures and stuff like that. So that was originally planned on Monday, but I just felt we needed a lot more hope this week. And so I felt with telling a little bit more of the personal story, the journey, showing kind of how, even though I had this word way back when, being obedient to Christ led me to where we are today. And along that too, like one of the big things that was hard for us to give up, slowly God started whittling away different things that we would turn over to Him, that we'd be more reliant on Him for. And one of the hardest, of course, was, at least for us, was finances. And even up to a couple of years ago, it was still, we had whittled way back. We had been like, hell yeah, we trust God. We're still like, we're freaking out. It's getting close. The bills are due. And the last couple of years has really kind of eased us into that. Whereas now, I personally at least don't have really any concerns for it. I always know God will provide for me. I know that will give us enough, and just gives me a peace in that regard for that. And then, I said financially, and then just over the years, He's really given me a peace about other parts too. So there's always more to give, and He always shows you more. And the more peace you get, the more peace He asks for. Ask
you a pokey question.
Always. Cole has a
I think it's
pokey
only
question.
fair
Yeah.
Because of all the things you said today. No, were there times in your walk when obedience was hard?
if there were times in my life when obedience was hard, I would say yes. I mean, obvious. I feel that's an obvious one. Those are the things we talked about on Monday, actually, which I was going to put in the sermon, was what are reasons why we aren't obedient? And for me, so some people it's out of fear, some people it's out of, in the unknown. I said I have a great faith in God. I know God's there. I tend to be a little bit sometimes more Jonah-like in that regard. That I know God's goodness. I know He does, but sometimes I don't want to. It's like I don't, well, or I don't want the responsibility sometimes. Of that. For me, is one of the things that I struggle with. It's like, yeah, somebody we were talking to this week actually was talking about that. Sometimes when you take on new things, you really feel obligation to these things. And they were talking to us about separating kind of obligation from grace. And
Like having the grace to do it.
yeah, and again, it's kind of more of the heart condition about it, which we've been talking about consistently, is if you're feeling obligated to do something, it's not necessarily your heart's in the right place with it. You're just doing it because you feel you have to do it. Whereas if you're doing it through grace because Christ gave you grace, so therefore you're sharing that grace, then you don't have that as much of a burden, as much as obligation to it. And so you're doing it because you want to share that grace, you want to share that love. And it's just one of the things, like I said, God's really shown us in the last few months is just heart condition is a huge part of it, why you do something. I mean, yes, so you can do it out of obligation and it'll look good like that, but the more you can release that obligation and the more you can do it out of grace, just the better you'll feel and the better I feel that it works. So sometimes you got to do it out of obligation or just to struggle through, but the more you can do it out of actual wanting to, which I feel is really from building more of a relationship with Christ. Like I said, nobody gets there overnight. I told you our story roughly about how each of those different situations, I had to lean more into Christ. I had to learn more about Him. I even had a section there, where I kind of was like figuring out who I was, what I was, and then it came back. Because I said I've always had that faith. I never have had the doubt that He wasn't there because I've had that experience young. But for me, that was good thing. So I just wanted that to give kind of hope. And I really felt that was more what today was. I felt that was a good follow-up to peace, actually. Because originally I said obedience is obviously a good follow-up too, but I really felt that with everything going on in the world, just hope was one of those things that everybody really kind of needed this week. And the personal touch always helps.
Okay, does anyone else have questions for Nick? Like about his testimony and about like the process, because it's really easy to be like, oh, we talked about this in 15 minutes, and that sounds really easy. Like those weren't easy. Like there were times that was really hard to be obedient.
Did you have more of an experience of peace when you followed through in your obedience?
I would say yes. When I followed through with the obedience, I definitely had more of a peace, because otherwise I feel like you're kind of like Jonah, where you're going to the other end of the world, to avoid what he's telling you to do. But you always have that feeling that he's chasing you, It's like he's going to send a fish after you to swallow you and bring you back. So it just keeps you anxious, I feel. Whereas if you're obedient to him, it brings you peace. Not yet. I learned my lesson early enough, I guess. I only went halfway around the world, not the whole world.
I think like standing on the side, like watching Nick in some ways grapple with that obedience piece, like specifically moving here, there was this moment when he's like, man, like Lord, if X, Y, or Z happens, I'm going to take that as confirmation for us to move. And literally, God did like each one.
Yeah.
And he was like, don't,
Yeah, at that point, I definitely did a lot more Gideon, putting out fleeces, seeing if this is really you, do it again. I was like, all right, now do it the opposite way to prove that it's actually you and this isn't just coincidence.
For sure. Yeah.
So there's times in your life that were less obvious decisions than other times.
Yeah, like I said, moving to California, I feel was a very distinct crossroad in life. When I first met Nicole, when she gave me her number, that one I felt was like a solidified, this is gonna happen. I knew it wasn't the right time though, so in there are many regards that kind of gave me peace in that, because I said I knew it wasn't the right time, so I could let go of it and kind of just give it to God. As far as that, because I said I knew it was going to come back around eventually, no matter what.
I think that's true for everybody. Some decisions are more obvious than others, and you have to use some more faith to believe God.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's amazing how far Dalton was.
Did your brother also follow you and go in the military too, or not?
No, I was the only one of my siblings who actually went in the military. James decided to follow Thad actually into the UPS world, and and then
Kind of like the military.
yeah, it's like the military. They wear brown, they got uniforms, It's like
No air conditioners.
Always running.
always running. Yeah. My other sister, she's become a writer, and then my youngest brother, he does his own thing. He's actually an independent contract. Oh no, but he's works with a company that does independent contracts for the military. So he makes more money than the military. So
He's getting to.
he's much more business savvy and stuff like that. So
He's doing the helicopter skids or something.
yeah, it's something about for the aircraft carriers that clean helicopters or something. Yeah, it's something like that.
What was the hardest decision when it was you had to be obedient? Was it, and then why? Why was it hardest?
The hardest decision,
Through this journey.
yeah. I would say one of the hardest decisions was actually the officially working towards becoming a pastor. I think that was actually in some ways something I was most reluctant to do, even though it's kind of, again, like it's one of those things that I knew was my destiny, as they say. And I felt sometimes, I'd fought it for many years, and I don't know, for some reason that one was one of the ones that I struggle with the most. It's actually just accepting that and moving forward with it.
Well, and when you went to become a pastor, you weren't just becoming a pastor, you were already a father,
Yeah.
a grandson taking care of grandparents. You had trying to make the farm many, many responsibilities and burdens,
Yeah.
and yet you still stepped out of faith.
Yeah.
And it may have been a harder struggle, but you had all these other things also
Mhm.
that you were dealing with and on your mind, knowing you had a responsibility to those two.
Yeah.
And so I think it was awesome that you took the great leap of faith and obeyed the Father, saying, man, I got all this other stuff going on. I'm still putting you first.
Yeah.
And that's awesome.
Yeah. That was definitely, I think that was, for some reason, more of the struggle. I said, I don't know, because it's like one of those things I knew that, was going to happen one way or another eventually. Yeah. Any more questions?
When you were in the military, what states did you all go to? Georgia, Washington?
Yeah, I pretty much, when I was in the military, I went to Georgia, Alabama. Well, I parachuted into Alabama. I mainly stayed in Georgia, pretty much. I didn't go to many states. Georgia, I went to Fort Benning, then I went to Fort Gordon, which is still in Georgia. And then airborne school, I went back to Benning. And then we said occasionally I'd parachute into Alabama, but I'd never actually driven into Alabama. But
You also went to Iraq.
and then I went overseas 3 times to Iraq. I did 15 times. Yeah. It was fun. It's being like thrown into a washing machine. You get thrown around and then also whoosh, then whiplash back to normal. It's weird because the first time I went parachute, it's like they open up the door, all the wind comes through, and then you're just standing there, Like, especially if you're like the first person because you're waiting for the drop zone. You have to stand there right in the door. You're staring out, and honestly, it doesn't look real. For me, it's particularly, it looks like a picture. Is all it does. It looks like a picture with a whole bunch of wind blowing at you. You know, yeah. You got all these people behind you, and so it's like you kind of feel the urgency that you have to get out because you have all these other people behind you, and you know it's a small window to get out because otherwise people start falling in the wrong areas, and they build you up to it. Like I said, I explained on Monday was I used to have a really big fear of heights. Actually, I was at the point where if I look at the sky or like fly a kite, I start to feel nauseous. It's like it's a little extreme, but that's kind of how I was. And I slowly, started getting over my fears. I would start, climbing ladders, take care of stuff on the roof. You kind of had to, living on a farm sometimes. You just have to do it. And so I worked myself up that way. Then once, you get to airborne school, at airborne school, they start making you jump off things higher and higher. You start jumping off a box, learning how to land correctly so you don't hurt yourself. And then they eventually work you up to like a 35-foot tower, which you jump off like you're jumping out of an airplane, but you're on a zip line. And that's actually quite a few people, and that's where who really are deathly afraid of heights, that's where you kind of get kicked out of school there, because a lot of people can't even do that. If you can't do that, they're not going to send you up in an airplane. Because once you get up in the airplane, if you do that, they put a boot in your back and kick you out the plane, and then they kick you out of the school after you'd fallen. It's like after you parachuted out. Yeah, it does. You have your reserve. We didn't have any major issues. That was in battalion. She's referring to sometimes your fellow comrades, you have to watch out because there are sky sharks in the air. One of the rules of airborne school is lower jumper always has the right of way, because as you're parachuting, the lower guy so you're here, whoever's lower, air is holding up your parachute. That's the only thing holding up your parachute. So if you go over the lower guy, your parachute collapses, you fall through, then your parachute opens again, then theirs collapses, and so you can get stuck in this loop, and you can both get hurt. But then you have guys too, because being humans, none of us want to walk any further than we have to. So you get the first guy out is usually the furthest away from the rendezvous point. So that first guy out, he grabs his parachute and pulls it, so he shoots across as far as he can to get there. So you got to watch out for the guy below you to see if anybody's being it's called sky sharking, because you go across and you steal the air from under people, so you don't have to walk as far. But it makes it exciting. Like I said I was more scared of other fellow jumpers than I was of jumping out of the airplane. But I digress.
Washington was great after Georgia. No humidity like that.
Georgia was exciting for the fact I swear I didn't see the same bug twice. There's because a lot of our training we were out in the forest or the jungles or whatever you want to call it of Georgia, swampies. It wasn't quite as many swamps over in that part of it. It was more just foresty. And it's ants, bugs. You sleep on the ground, no tents or anything like that. Because the military has this thing with training, you don't get any of the fun stuff that you actually carry with you. You just get to carry it. And so you're freezing and it's raining, and you just get to carry your wet gear on your back. You don't actually get to wear it. But it makes you stronger, they say. So. You learn to appreciate it. But yeah, I never saw the same bug twice, I swear, in Georgia.
But the summers were pretty in Washington.
Yeah, Washington had beautiful summers.
When they have summer.
The rest of the time, it's pretty much gray and drizzly. We did miss, after 10 years up there, we did miss sunshine. That was part of the other things we were happy about moving back to California for. Especially growing up in California, you just miss the sun. Any last questions? So we're going to end with a quick. We'll take a few minutes of silence just to kind of pray. We'll say, what's God asking you to do in your life? What are some things maybe that He's spoken over your life that you need to follow through and you need to be obedient to Him and move forward in, or take at least a step towards. So again, I said we're not all able to just transition. Sometimes it takes time. It takes gradual steps. And what areas do we need to give to Him? So we'll take a few minutes to pray, or just in silence for that, and then I'll close this in prayer.